Welcome to Teaching Truth. My name is Glenn Cartwright. What do you think of when you think of the word culture? The word culture. Paul engaged with the culture in Athens, this culture of philosophers, men who reasoned and debated, the intellectual capital of the world, as we discovered yesterday when we looked at the city of Athens. What do you think when you think about culture? Let me try and develop this a little bit more. A visit to Edinburgh will normally include a sightseeing trip down the Royal Mile, the road that leads from Holyrood Palace up to Edinburgh Castle. Just below St Giles, the kirk of John Knox, there is the old Market Cross, the place where people used to meet to gossip, to hear public proclamations, to witness public executions, to buy and sell their goods. Looking east from there, you can almost catch a sight of the Royal Palace. Looking west, you can see the back door to the Scottish Parliament. Looking south, you will walk a few yards to the law courts. Looking north, you are face to face with the city chambers of Edinburgh. Right in the heart of Edinburgh, the cultural capital of Scotland, the Market Cross is positioned at the heart of the city. And our theology, our apologetics, our preaching needs to be positioned there too, addressing the culture. Now let me unpack for you this word apologetics, because this is hugely relevant and applicable in relation to this particular passage in Acts. Apologetics is not apologizing for the Christian faith, but apologetics is having boldness and confidence in the truth of the biblical message and its relevance to human history and philosophy. Let me say that again. Apologetics is having a boldness and confidence in the truth of the biblical message and its relevance to human history and philosophy. That could be said of Paul as he engaged the culture in Athens with boldness, with confidence in the biblical message, but with a relevance to history and philosophy, engaging, debating with, connecting with the philosophers of his day. Think of some of the ancient apologists, people like Augustine, Anselm, Thomas Aquinas, Pascal. Think of some of the more modern ones like C.S. Lewis, Alistair McGrath, and David Robertson. So what should our response be to culture? Well, I believe that Christians, you and I, if we follow Jesus, can be one of four things in relation to culture. We can either be against culture, totally against culture, or we can be of culture, or we can be in tension with culture, or we can be transformers of culture. So what are some of the cultures of the age in which we live? Well, I believe that there are three dominant and predominant cultures that we find here in the 21st century. Now, it's important that we understand our culture as Paul understood his in Athens, in order that we, understanding our culture, can, like Paul, reason, debate, in the right sense of the word, argue, can hold our ground with that confidence in the biblical truth, that boldness, that our apologetics would be grounded in the Word of God. So three cultures of the modern age. One, postmodernism. Postmodernism would say that there is no such thing as absolute truth. Postmodernism would say that there is more emphasis on image, rather than content. The postmodern child would navigate his or her Xbox today with ease, but if he or she opens a Bible, it is with confusion. Postmodernism. There's also pluralism. What do I mean by pluralism? Well, you have that pick and mix of religions. If you're old enough like me, you might remember the Sweetie Island Woolworths and the pick and mix, where you could go and mix and pick your sweeties. And honestly, pluralism is like that, whereas that pick and mix of religion is a DIY spirituality. The age of Aquarius, New Age philosophy comes in here. The three cultures of the modern age. And there's also consumerism. What do we offer? It's what suits me. Presentation over content. Presentation over content. Let me read this to you, written by the Reverend Dr. Kenneth Roxburgh. He said this, that in a postmodern culture, with a morally fragmented context often celebrated by society, the church today, that's you and I, faces a religious pluralism and a DIY spirituality. Not so different, note this, not so different from the Gnosticism of the ancient world, of the world of Athens, in which Paul found himself, in which our faith was born. Christian theology, our beliefs, must be careful to avoid any dilution of our true convictions, but rather presenting them in humility. So it's important in a postmodern culture, in a morally fragmented, pluralistic, consumerist society, our apologetics is strong, that boldness and confidence in the Word of God and our ability to handle that Word wisely and well and to give an answer for the hope that we have. I want to say something really important here about how our communication, our witness, and particularly how preaching engages culture. Because Paul, through his preaching and communication, engaged the culture in Athens. Preaching must identify, I believe, and then challenge the presuppositions on which contemporary culture is based. Let me say that again. Preaching must identify and then challenge the presuppositions on which contemporary culture is based. Preaching engages culture. And preaching a la Paul in Athens style was not just conversational. Paul debated, he reasoned, he spoke. But underneath it was confrontational. It was confrontational. And preaching that is not confrontational, friends, is no more really than a Bible talk, than an educational piece. Preaching by its nature, I believe, is confrontational. And that is not to say that the preacher, the communicator, you and I, ought not to engage wisely and well like Paul did. You see, a conversational approach, hear this, a conversational approach goes down well in our culture, but our task in communicating is to say, this is the Word of God. One of my favourite preachers is the Reverend Dr. Liam Gallagher, Senior Minister of 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia, a native Scot himself. And he says this, and I totally agree with this. The danger today is the need to adapt preaching to the culture rather than preaching being seen as the prophetic word of the church to the culture, addressing it to change, saying to the culture, this is the word of God, you change to accommodate the word of God, not the other way around. The word of God does not change to suit culture. You change, culture change, to accommodate to the word of God. You see, the word of God critiques culture. And it seems to me that that's the prophetic image of the Old Testament prophets who were addressing not just the culture of their day, but the nations. And so just as Paul engaged wisely and well with a bold conviction in the gospel, we too, learning from Paul and learning from the importance of how we engage culture, can too be those people who don't just have the conversation, but actually confront people with the truth and the reality of the gospel message. So may we be those people like Paul in Athens, yes, who can reason, who can debate, but have that security and that assurance in the Word of God, that good grasp of the Word of God, that our apologetics is strong, and that we don't adapt, as it were, preaching and communication to the culture, but we allow it to be the prophetic Word of God to the culture, saying, you change to accommodate to the Word of God. And when we do that, God will honour His Word and God will bless His Word. Let's engage our culture, let's understand our culture, and let's be people who take the Bible to our culture, as Paul did. God bless you. Join me tomorrow for the next episode of Teaching Truth.